Hello and most welcome to H723, and I am recording here out in the woods and have the privilege to have a visitor here with us, Claudia Helms, who actually was in the beginning of the H series. I think it was like 200 or something like that, but it still was about Heidegger. That's about 500 episodes ago. And we are today going to talk about something very interesting, and that's how we meddle with action. And I named it reflective consciousness once more to sort of pinpoint the active ingredient, what makes the whole thing. But let me start with how Jan Eyskens, my dear friend and worker with these neurological problems that, for example, people suffering from burnout syndrome have. And he discovered that, oddly enough, people who've been in space for more than a couple of months showed up similar symptoms as burnout patients. And the cause was not, as we usually say, massive stress or work overload or confusing schedules or bosses who were unclear or aggressive. No, it was something completely different. But to discover that, one really had to think what is happening in space. And one thing that happens in space is things that you sort of throw or leave to themselves, they fall to the ground on Earth because of gravity. But what happens in space is something completely different. Once you leave an object, it will not fall. It will linger on in the air. But the thing is, you are so accustomed to looking down, so you will still look down. Habitual action. So far so good. But what happens next is a contra order coming, and this is coming from another place in your system. And the contra order gives an adjustment. Contra order tells the head, look up. So first you look down and then you look up. And this is a very, very crude example, but the same thing happens with your body when you are in a weightless environment. You will do wrong things all the time because your whole body is usually accustomed to gravity. So you need to give contra orders, contra directions. Here the problem starts. The contra ordering is the cause of this problem. Contra ordering is coming from another point. It's not the same point of origin. It's actually a meddling. Yes, it's an obvious case of meddling. But once you understand that, you can make a comparison to burnout, and you can start to understand that burnout is actually a meddling in the proper doing of things. And when that meddling becomes habituated, it comes to a change in muscle mass and a change of neurons. And I mentioned that before, and that's when we go from T1 to T2. T1 muscles are the ones that are aerobic. They take sugar as fuel. They are slow twitch. And they have stamina. They go to muscle group 2. They are anaerobic. And they take sugar as sustenance. And they are quick. There is a parallelism here with neurons. We have neurons type 1, the slow twitch, and we have neurons type 2. There's a parallelism here. So you could say, and quick action has a quick type of thought. That thought quality is different. So these astronauts, when they were on Earth again, did not think the same way as they were before. They were burned out, and they got burned out without any inkling of stress. These were actually extremely robust people, and the work effort was normal, even mild. This has already been discussed in different episodes. We've talked about in the game of tennis, I can recommend. And he speaks about self 1 and self 2, that there are two selves. So when you try to do something, self 1 gets you to the position to do it. Self 1 do the motivation. Self 1 will get you there again. But the performer of the action, the doer, the non-verbal person is self 2. That's the actual one who does it. And he was talking about tennis. So tennis is done by self 2. And self 1, if it meddles in the affairs of self 2 and tries to do the movement, consciously try to do the movement, you end up in a similar problem as the astronaut, but to a much less degree. But it will be quite sufficient for you to fail your game, because this meddling is going to make everything more discoordinated. It's only self 2 that can do the proper things. And you can say that self 2 is like a bit similar to T1 and 1. So there's a routine to do things, and we mentioned that before. When it comes to human movement, every movement should start with an expansion of the back. That's the primordial power of every movement. The only movement the back can do is to expand. It can't do anything else. It cannot contract, can only expand. And that expansion is necessary for the movement of the limbs. And it has to come in the right order. It needs to start with the back and then the limbs. And you can say that the first movement, the movement of the back, is a neutral movement. It does not have an aim. So if I want to pick up a piece of chocolate here, my aim is the chocolate, to get the chocolate in my hand. That's the aim, and I do it with my limb. So that's what we usually say is purpose, and that is subject 1. Self 1 gets the idea of having chocolate. But what happens is I do the movement with the hand before with the back. And the movement with the back doesn't have a purpose. But it needs to be there. And only self number 2 can understand that. And once I got habituated and doing like I did here, taking the chocolate, serving Claudia chocolate as well.
Thank you.
I done it in the wrong order. And every time I send the orders to my bread, I want to have the chocolate, I'm going to do it in the wrong order. There's no escaping this. You cannot get around it. Once it's established, you can't get around it. And that has been the major problem treating burnout and all other repetitive strain injury related diseases, and probably a heap of other diseases as well. But there's simply no way of getting it around. Once it's established that self number one meddles the affairs with the self number two, it becomes habituated. Once it's a habit, it's so connected to the thinking and the words. And actually, the Alexander teachers noticed they only had to mention a movement for the strain to activate self number one in the wrong order. And finally, we have come to a conclusion what you actually can do. And what you can do is you slow down the movement. You have a restricted movement you do, not unrestricted, but a restricted movement. And you make it so slow that self number one cannot be engaged. One could say that self number one is impatient to a very small degree, but it's still too impatient for ultra slow movements. What happens with ultra slow movements, it's rather amazing. The system can read off itself. That means for the first time in a very long time, it can actually auto-adjust. So you need to slow down the movement and the system can read out itself and it will adjust. And that cannot be consciously done, but you can indirectly, consciously, with self number one, tell the body to move ultra slow. In the beginning, it will not yield because it's going to be resistance. And you can actually say that self number one will not give over the power to something else. Rather, it doesn't like to be restricted. It's almost like a child who has some sort of focus problem. It doesn't want to focus. It doesn't want to sit still. And self number one is a bit like that. It doesn't want to stay put, to be passive, not engaged. That's the way of coming around the problems with self number one being incredibly closely knitted together with our words and our thinking. It's enough with the word to engage self number one. It's enough with some thinking and it's going to be engaged. And the odd thing, that will even happen when you are fast asleep. So when you dream something and that dream has a special connection or some sort, some movement, you will do that movement in sleep. And that will cause tension even if you are sleeping. And then you can rather understand how ingrained this is, because normally we think when we sleep we're completely relaxed. Nonsense. All the tension you have during the day is going to show up during your sleep. And this is not uncommon these days, a twisted fist during sleep. I've seen it loads of times. And that's a very, very hard tension. It means the whole arm is tensed, the whole upper body is tense, and the neck is tense going downwards. So you're not relaxed when you sleep either. So you need to get that out of your head. You're not relaxed when you sleep. As long as S1 is active, every thought, even in a dreaming state or whatever it is, whatever neural activity that might be somewhere in your system, you will tense even if you're fast asleep. I bet you 60-70% of the population today are tensed even when they're sleeping. It doesn't escape you then. And of course, sleep is not restful then if you have tension. I've seen extreme cases, I remember now, in the military. People sleeping with their arms in the airs. Everything can happen under stress. What happens with ultra slow movement? When S1 goes back, he leaves his job. It's almost similar to while drawing, and the left hemisphere cannot do the job, and therefore it gets horribly annoying, and it wants to meddle, it wants to get into the action, and then it sends signal to the whole system, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored, and this boredom becomes stronger and stronger, and that's the protest from the left hemisphere. This is similar to the left hemisphere. It's going to protest in the beginning. And what you will notice too, and this is the calibrating movement, if you go down in very, very slow movement, the system will read it out that something is wrong, so to speak. Something needs to be calibrated. And that's a tremor. When you move yourself very slow, a tremor will come. And that's because it's muscle group T2 and N2 that's engaged, the neurons. And then when the system feels that, perceives that, it will regulate that. So the trembling in this case is a good feedback. That means it's working. But the trembling can be very, very little, so you won't even notice it consciously. But the system will notice it. You can also notice that for the first time, my movements are not so directed. That's also a very good feedback. And this is very similar to a person who has a faulty leg, maybe a limp of some sort. And if they want to move consciously or in a way that looks like normal walk, they will do it quicker. And when they do it quicker, they take help from the speed to do a movement. And the idea this system has is, if I do it fast enough, I'm going to do the movement anyway. It's going to use the force of movement, the speed, to make it done. And this could be compared if you feel really sick one day and you completely waste, maybe you got the flu, maybe you have a terrible hangover, maybe you are excruciatingly tired. If you get up the speed, you know you can do it anyway. And this is what we are doing on a daily basis. We start to do things without good intention, with an intention that comes from our whole body. Try to make a donkey do something it doesn't like. It doesn't work, you know that. But we trying to do our body do something it doesn't like, and we do it still. The donkey refuses, but we do it still. There's somewhere the problem starts. Can you see the parallel now to the astronauts? They are forcing themselves in a way. Yes, it's a very smooth forcing. They force their gaze to stay here. But still, it's a conscious meddling with a normal movement. The normal movement is to look down. And they will continue to initiate the orders to look down. So it will be a movement like this. And you can see already here it's a little strenuous. And that will erode the whole posture in the end. They come down to earth like this, not because of the gravity that sets in, because they lost their integrity in the system. That's called tensegrity. And it's natural, it works as long as you don't meddle with it, as long as you don't try to consciously move yourself. But if you meddle with that, it's going to turn on you, almost like a donkey. You kick too much, it's going to kick back. And you don't want to experience that. It actually happened to a friend of mine who tried to get the donkey to move somewhere in Spain. It actually kicked him. Thank God donkeys don't kick that hard as a horse, but he was blue anyway. They do kick. I can say the auto adjustment in the ultra smooth movement is quite incredible. And that's the only way to retrain the system. There's no other way. And no matter how you tell yourself, no matter how you try to convince yourself or somebody else, even worse, that will always trigger S1, self-1. And this is similar to the method that Friedrich Matthias Alexander sketched out in the early 19th century, early 20th century. And that method was to have an ordering, a verbal ordering that is very specific, and every little syllable is pronounced in the head. And he also said he could see it loud and clear. And Alexander had a very, very keen focus. He knew all of William Shakespeare by heart. He was a reciter of Shakespeare. And apparently it was enough to mention 4 or 5 words, and he could track where in the whole making of Shakespeare that turned up, whether it was Hamlet, Othello on page 51 or 284, paragraph 4 or sonnet 2 or something like that. He knew it. That meant that when he ordered himself mentally, he did it so clear that he actually developed neuron 1, clear thinking, concentrated thinking, exact thinking. That will actually also stop S1. Well, it will discipline it, because then thoughts cannot pop up like they want anymore. You have an ordering system that goes over that. And combination of giving verbal orders and ultra slow movement is even more fantastic. But we will settle for ultra slow movement because that's actually a very, very good start. And this has actually been practiced by happenstance, I say, by intuition, you could say, or good manners. But some forms of Tai Chi is actually constructed that way. And they go into ultra slow movement to readjust its system. And that's proven in China to be extremely helpful with coordinating, disbalancing, and digestive problems. It's a whole bouquet of different symptoms and problems. And the ultra slow movement can actually take care of that. And we know for a fact this is the cause of so much problems when it comes to working life today. And this is the root of what's being burned out means. It is actually you forcing yourself at one instance. And in the end, as somebody told me the other day, she managed to get herself burned out by the attitude, I can rest when I'm dead. And that's the attitude of self-1. It doesn't care about anything. It's quite ruthless in a way. You can think of S1 as a drill sergeant. I'm thinking of Sergeant Major Jones from these old British war movies who just shouts all the time. It's a bit like that. It's a sergeant major that tells the body to do things when he doesn't have any supervenience, when actually the body cannot be forced. And this also goes as well with the examination of COVID patients that Jan did. COVID patients are so tired after the disease, so they need to use blunt force to move. And when they do that, they cause the same effect. And that effect is actually worse than the rehabilitation. Of course, they don't have a choice. They need to move. But this is the wrong way to go about it. But it's good news. We can now, for the first time in human history, regulate this. It's never happened before. Nobody had the key before how to stop S1 from controlling itself. We've been playing cat and mouse games with this for at least 120 years. And people have been complaining, and we've been trying to hiding the problem. And I think most Alexander teachers says that the student doesn't listen enough in the end usually, or the teacher is not good enough to convince the person not to, so to speak, misuse himself or herself. But the only way to get around S1, it slow down the process so it can't intermingle anymore. That's the only possibility. There is no conscious way of doing it, because this is part of consciousness. So you see, this is a way of going outside moment 22. That can be done. Well, I think that sums the whole theoretical framework for this up, and I'm going to go into the more method later on. But now we can practice, and I say thank you for coming, Claudia. Yeah. And thank you for listening, and I bid you a very pleasant good night.